Good morning, everybody. Morning to the panelists. Good morning to our journalists, stakeholders. Thank you for joining us on this really important, we believe very important national webinar. My name is Tim Hughes. I'm the convener of the South African Self-Protection Alliance. We came together as a loose formation to look at things like gun control and the FCA, but that has really taken us into a much broader debate, you know, about safety and security in society, the role of the police, the role of community policing fora. And then, of course, as a country, as a nation, we were just shaken to the core by the events in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng a couple of weeks ago that I think have perplexed us, have left us concerned about the fabric of our society, have raised questions about community relations, about policing, capacity, planning, intelligence. Issues such as race and ethnicity have come into play, uncomfortably so, but they are there. And increasingly, there's a narrative being developed around the question of vigilantes and vigilantism, which has created, we think, a sort of a toxic mix. Today, what we'd like to do is to discuss these issues in a sort of calm, sober, analytical manner, even if we do have a debate between ourselves, and to try and get some clarity and understanding about what we're seeing in our society. And yes, there will be a focus in due course on the role of guns, weaponry, and finally on the FCA. But we'll go from the general to the particular, please. And we've put an outstanding panel together today to talk through these issues. And I'm going to introduce each one of them as we go through. So first, please allow me to introduce Dr. Rama Naidu to you. Rama, I would assume, is pretty well known to many people, given that the role that he's played in KwaZulu-Natal, the unique role he's played in the development of democracy or the strengthening of democracy in KwaZulu-Natal. His role as director of the Democracy Development Program, an outstanding academic with his PhD from KZN, and he attended Northwestern University, Chicago, I think, Rama, which is just a brilliant institution. I would love to go there myself. He's now sort of gone into the private sector and doing his own consultancy, but I'm sure that you would have heard on radio, television, and other platforms recently, Rama's very sober analysis about what are some of the underpinning issues in KwaZulu-Natal, as it were, calmly analyzing the situation. So we've asked Rama today to help us understand and provide some perspective on KwaZulu-Natal in particular. He may wish to expand further on that. And perhaps, Rama, you may want to touch on questions of race, ethnicity, vigilantes. You have a free rein as far as that is concerned. And then we'll move over to other panelists. Can I ask you to lead us on this discussion, please, Rama? And thank you very, very much for your time today.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks to everyone else for being here today. The question of KZN is a really complex one. And it's been like that ever since the advent of democracy. This has been the so-called troubled province, with the old IFP-ANC conflict, the fact that this was the birthplace of apartheid in terms of how rigidly people were separated. You put all those things into a cauldron and you apply a little bit of heat, and that's all you need to get a steaming broth that overflows. And this is what happens here in KZN, and it's not the first time it's happened. Not the first time it happened. So to give you some idea of context, the danger in KZN has always been the issue of the ethnic element. The Zulu king, the Zulus, the Indian minority, and those kind of dynamics. So what I believe happened here that ignited this were a number of things, but the two big things for me was, one, the supporters of Zuma, who threatened to make the country ungovernable if he was not freed. Now that statement coming from the ruling party was simply not acceptable. It's a country governed by the rule of law and a constitution. It was a due process, not for us to decide about that, but for politicians openly to take sides in that thing and say we support someone when the law has spoken, and openly contempt of court. I mean, that entire issue was taken out of hand. There was a threat of violence. If you don't release Zuma, then this is what will happen in KZN. And at the time I was asked by some interviewers, so, is there an impending war happening here? And my point was quite blunt and honest, that we can no longer keep on living with threats to our democracy without enforcing the rule of law. Whatever it is, at some point in your democracy, something has to shift and turn. And this to me was a clear case that in this particular instance, if we did not stand behind the court system and that contempt of court and treated Zuma any differently, that would also be our contribution to the issue. So the threat of that insurrection and Amabutu coming up and making the country ungovernable has been played many times in this province. Don't mess with us, this is what will happen. So my idea was at some point, challenge it and say, come, because sometimes I think the threat is more imagined than real. I was not so sure that a politician would be able to mobilize the so-called Zulu nation, because the Zulu nation is not one way of thinking. There are lots of really good, great leaders and people in that group who can think for themselves, and that might not have happened. So on the one hand, you had this, and what we had was a threat of violence. If you don't do this, we will make this province ungovernable. And that was the threat. I think it came at a time that was really badly timed. Because to me, it was a sense that the ANC had lost touch with its people on the ground. It was so busy fighting amongst itself in its camps, especially in KZN, where the battle looms with the camps very clearly, that they did not factor in the point that at some point, ordinary people would rebel against it. And so when they threatened the violence, so there were two elements. The one was the element of saying ungovernable, but then the notion that was fueled by the social media and by everyone else, which we now believe was actually orchestrated, to say, this is your chance. Go and do what you want, take what you want. No one will stop you from doing it. And as people became emboldened by the first wave of the looting, and we saw blatantly on SAFM every single time, the reporters would say, where are the police? Where is the army? And what it created was a sense of huge fear in communities across the province, that in fact they were unprotected, that they were left on their own. And this looting was going on in broad daylight, in the center of Durban. Video cameras were showing people coming in 4x4s, obviously taking the advantage of the space because there was no one stopping them. And so it escalated into space. And the sense was, we can do this in any case. I do not believe that most of the people who went out to so-called loot, in inverted commas, were bad people. There was a sense of anxiety, a sense of liberation, a sense of a chance to get out of their poverty. And the first waves, you saw people taking things like mealie meal and food and canned goods. And it quickly escalated into TVs and fridges and stoves. So I think there were two elements to it. The one element was people just being fed by the poverty and saying, this is our chance to get something. COVID had completely decimated the poorest of the poor. And in some part of me said, when I saw this, some part of me reached out to say, because they had not been listened to for so long, and in such a dire condition, if I was there in that place and no one did anything to me, and social media was saying, go and help yourself, I'm not sure what I would do under those circumstances. It was just a difficult time. And so you put these two elements together, the criminal element and the genuine mass of poor people who felt, let's go and get some food for ourselves before the shelves run dry. You have a perfect recipe for what unfolded in this province. So on the one hand, you had strategic places being targeted, transportation routes, supply chains being disrupted, being burnt, and that was different. So the one was most certainly, in my estimation, related to the element of the ungovernableness of the province. Let's disrupt it. Let's show how strong we are. but that was fueled by the looting and what happened with those things. So when you put those two things together, and we saw what happened on TV live every minute on SAFM, it created a whole lot of different things in people's minds. For many people that I spoke to, they said, this is surreal. This could never happen in South Africa. It could happen anywhere in the world, but it's happening right here. And people could see the smoke and hear the gunfire and see people running down the street. And in the absence of that notion of I feel safe or I feel unsafe, a human reaction sets in. You either do two things, you fight or you flee. Those are the only two options you have in that state of fear. And so what we saw in response to that was the non-action of the state, to the lack of police presence in the space, was that people for the first time in this country, and I think it is the first time for me anyway, that were mobilized because they came to the understanding, if we don't do it, no one else will. I think there was a moment for us in this democracy. If we don't do it, no one else will. And so you had this huge mobilization effort starting across the province. And when driving around to these points where people were mobilized, they were black, white, and brown, yellow standing together around fires, holding hands for the first time, meeting each other as citizens, with only one intention: to protect their families. They saw the looting, but the fear that was fueled by the social media said, we are next. We're next. They're coming. And we had so much of fake news happening that fear completely overwhelmed people. And I was absolutely shocked when people I know were saying, our bags were packed, our car was reversed into the driveway, and we were ready to leave. And I said, really? And so it just made me understand the level of fear in that space. So given that level of fear that people had, it was not difficult for people to instigate some of the violence that we saw happening. The mob mentality, the gangsterism, the thuggery, the murders that took place, because it's like it was waiting for it to happen. It just needed one voice. And I think we all know what happens when a so-called mob gets together. The individual's brain stops and we think as a group. So what started to happen was that people began to other the others. It's them, it's African people, it's Indian people. So they emerged a single story that all people are like this. And it was outrageous because most people were not like that. People I'd spoken to were saying, no, but we don't want any part of this. In townships, our African brothers and sisters were trying to stop the looting. They were protecting the shopping malls. They turned up to clean up the place. They realized the hardship of what happened. Taxis for the first time came together for something good. And they said, let's stand together, because they saw their own business being threatened. So a whole lot of different dynamics came into place, which I think is a good thing for democracy, but is also for us a wake-up call to the state of how we respond to situations like this. And to me, the notion was that that fear that was being fueled by the media and the reports was not allayed by anyone from government until 2 days into the looting. And even then, the comments were, I think, not powerful enough to make people feel safe. And then we had a whole lot of things happen, which people, and of course, once people start having a story about something, the story becomes amplified. And so we heard stories of the state failed, the police are useless. When are you calling the army? Why can't you call a state of emergency? And of course, these are not light decisions to be taken. And they're difficult ones to take in that circumstance. People saying, are we in a civil war or not? And all those questions came to the fore in that space, and those stories began to get momentum. So now it became an anti-government thing. Politicians, as usual, were trying to appease both sides. And so we started a whole lot of things, all lives matter, Black lives matter, all the politics that we know happen in this space. So in the aftermath of that, And I think this is the important point, Tim, is that in the moment, in the heat of the moment, people do things without rationally working through things. But the aftermath of it, as we sit down to reflect on what happened, it is very easy for it to be hijacked by people at the extreme ends of both spectrum. And so the racial issue came up as a big issue. It always has come up in KZN. It's an old card. It's a powerful card because it invokes the old feelings. In the Indian group, a sense of we were always the minority, we always second-class citizens, and we're always in danger. So I think, Angie, we just need to mute everyone.
Colleagues, sorry, could everyone go on mute apart from Peter, if you don't?
Okay, so what happened with the racial tension once that was fueled and it came up, of course, all the media is immediately on that. So I've been getting a whole lot of calls. Rama, will you comment? And my question was, am I being asked as an Indian or as a South African? And that was an important question for me because I am a South African. I'm third generation. I don't know India. This is my home. This is where I belong. This is what I fought for. This is what I'll die for. But I was being painted into a corner. You are Indian, so you'd understand the Indian mind. It's not about the Indian African mind. It's about how we're being set up to distract from the real issues at stake. The work that has not been done in this country up to now. The issue of the real healing, the issue of building our communities across these lines. The difference between the haves and the have-nots. And those things are fundamental. And I believe that this time around, this particular incident was different from the ones in the past. They were not the normal kind of protest actions, the tottering for houses. It was like everything came together in one moment. And it's a moment that might not come to us again. So how we handle it, how we take it forward from here is really important. The violence associated with the looting is a symptom of a far bigger problem. In the cases of people who are murdered, and I use the word murdered, to me it's very clear. People who committed murder must face the full might of the law. I don't care what color you are or where you are from. Due process. But for people to stand at court with placards on either side without knowing the facts takes us nowhere. So you had the Indian faction and the African faction, one support, and they're supporting people without the facts. And that again is escalating. So a big part of our work right now is not to have nice conferences on social cohesion and we are one. It's about having honest conversations about what we need to do to cross these divides. And I think, Tim, a lot of communities that I've seen for the first time, or even businesses, have begun to realize starkly how big this difference is between the haves and the have-nots in this country. I believe most South Africans are good people. We want to make this thing work. We just don't know how. And for us, our real work as Democrats is to start having honest conversations with each other, first to see each other for what you are. It does not mean that I want your house or I want your car. It doesn't. That's a very superficial way of looking at it. My first thing is to connect to you as a human being and see it and see the fear for what it is. There's stories that we've been fed over a long period of time to keep us separate. Until we change that story and that narrative, we will remain stuck in this place for a long time to come. So every time these things come up, we have a big conference, we bring people together, and then it goes away. And it's been doing this since 1994. I think this is a chance for us to break that cycle and start something new. And I think that's the place where we're at right now. And this is not a quick fix. It's work that we have to do as a nation in the spaces we are in, wherever we find ourselves, every conversation that we have. Are we silent when that happens? Do we speak our voice, our truth, or not? So we all contribute to the problem because we're part of it. It's not created by someone else outside of us. And most certainly, if we wait for government to do it, and this is not unique to South Africa, it will never get done. It's up to us as citizens, as groups, as neighborhood watchers, as CPFs, to change the story and react differently to it. That's the only way we can get through something different in this country, and especially in KwaZulu-Natal. That's about as much as I can give you, Tim.
Rama, you've given us incredible insight, analysis that I haven't heard before, and I've listened to it very, very closely, as you can imagine. Your personal experiences, and you haven't dealt with this from even as an academic level, but actually from an analytical perspective, but a very personal perspective too, placing it in historical context. And also then a call to us not to be alarmist, but not to be passive, not to be adopting positions that are ill-informed, rather communicate and get some understanding and take context into account and the acuity of that context. But your final call is the one that I know you've lived by for many, many years now, which is get involved, deepen and strengthen democracy. And looking for partnerships, civil society partnerships, us getting involved, us getting engaged. So for that, we are eternally grateful. You gave us a segue as well, thank you, into Ambassador Andy, insofar as you reference, community policing fora and things like that. So I wanted to call on Andy to talk to us, probably now, Andy, with a more, you've come from this policy perspective, you've been involved in white papers, you've had that unique perspective advising ministers, you've advised MECs, you've been involved in the establishment of community policing forums. And when you see something like KwaZulu-Natal a couple of weeks ago and closer to home for you, Gauteng, I think, do you feel it's all fallen apart? It's all been unnecessary, we failed? If that is the case, then Andy, what have we got to do to try and build these structures together again? How do we build community policing forums? What's the role with the SAPS? SAPS have been painted as a profound failure in what happened in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Perhaps there's something a bit more textured going on here, as Rama has suggested. I'm going to hand over to you because you're the expert, and perhaps if you can just enlighten us a little bit more on these more specific issues, we'd be most grateful. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, colleagues, Terence, Rama, my brother, and Angie at the back, and the guys producing. There's nothing more constant than change. I have observed human beings in organizations in their own personal space, allowing change to drive them instead of them driving change. We all know that paradigm shift. The unfortunate part in this instance, we have allowed the paradigm to shift itself instead of doing what Rama spoke about earlier on, shifting the paradigm. And what do we mean by that? All community policing fora in the 1,112 plus policing precincts throughout the country have been given birth to by SAPS Act 68 of 1995. Chapter 7, to be more specific, of SAPS Act 68 of 1995, sections 18 to 23, that instructs or asks the member of the executive committee, the MEC, to talk to the provincial commissioner and or advise or instruct the provincial commissioner to establish a community plus police forum, a community plus police family, a community plus police organization, a community plus police movement, a community plus institution that addresses, 1, the prevention of crime, 2, the combating of crime, and the act specifically read in conjunction with the interim regulations of May 2001 on community policing fora, which specifically outlines the relationship between the community and the police and how it should unfold, how you establish these structures, how these structures operate, who sits in on these structures. For an example, quickly, your ward councillors who must participate in your local community police fora in Phoenix, in Beckersdal, where I was born and bred, in Mohlakeng, in Kreersdorp, in Kagiso. The ward councillor sitting in there by virtue of being a ward councillor, so that when you have the green areas where our mothers, our sisters walk through when they get to work to Sentin from Alexander at 4 a.m. in the morning, coming into Sentin, the green areas with trees and with tall grass to be cut by the council, and to ensure that the council takes its responsibility in terms of a safe street or crime prevention through environmental design, participates in on this platform called the Community Plus Police Forum. And the responsibilities of that organization, amongst others, with the critical stakeholders, is to engage communities every month, to go to communities out there. What you and I on this platform would refer to as town hall meetings, as we have seen them happen throughout the world. In my experience as an Interpol ambassador, I am stretching in 194 member countries of Interpol. You have town hall meetings where you address the generators of crime. In this particular instance, one of the generators of crime in KZN, in the KZN chaos and Gauteng chaos, one of those generators of crime is poverty. The second of those generators of crime is unemployment. Critical. The lockdown has caused a lot of people to lose their jobs, and people are hungry. And people are not only hungry, people are angry at service delivery from your law enforcement agencies that do not have the necessary capacity in terms of the resources. When you look at the last police budget, you realize that in the 2 financial years stretching from 2020 to 2019 to 2018, you realize a certain number of billions has taken away from the policing budget, even in this current financial year. And we have all witnessed on media that government is not going to pay an increase to public servants, inclusive of the police. That on its own hurts the morale from a policing point of view. Quickly running to my colleagues at the United Nations who prescribe that there should be 1 police officer to 400 people. And rushing back home here to whatever you want to call it, Sentin or Western Era or Randfontein or Krugersdorp or KZN or Phoenix or Western Cape. When you look at 1 police officer to the ratio of 1 police officer to a very huge number of citizens, you realize that there is that load, that stressful load on police officers. Let me be realistic and say, as a result of the violence or the unrest that we have seen in our country, police operations moved from a different shift from 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. in the afternoon for a number of days. And a few days ago, a week or two or so ago, they have changed the shift from 7 to 7. And these police officers have been operating daily, inclusive of Saturday and Sunday. And this takes a huge toll on the bodies of the individual, the stress level, the emotions. Remember, some of the family members of these police officers live in these communities where there has been chaos. Some of them have members who, family members, extended family members or relatives who might have been involved in looting as a result of hunger. Those who loot TVs and those who commit murder, you would know, team, that I would get straight to the point. You send them where they belong. You send them to the refrigerator to get their minds cooled down through the laws of this country. Those who are hotheads who think that they're above the law must be shown that none of those who commit crime is and will be above the law. Within the confines of the law, they must be dealt with. Like I say, you hear them cook and sister. The courts will give them the cook sisters, and the coffee, so that you can then begin to say law, the rule of law must obtain. Running quickly once again to streamline my thinking, your community policing fora in South Africa, from the vast experience that I have, could not have dealt with these issues that we have seen coming out, leading to the chaos that we have observed and witnessed as a result of a number of things. One, the resources to your community policing fora. Remember, the community policing fora cascades from law. It cascades from the constitution of the country. It's not Andy and a few guys on this discussion, on this panel, deciding to establish a community policing forum at the back of this office where I am, or the back of the office where you are seated. It's actually prescribed by law. The process or the system would comprise of the processes as well as the procedure to be taken to ensure that the people are safe. The National Development Plan, Chapter 12 of the NDP says by 2030, the people of this country should be feeling safe, and they should actually be safe. How do you make them safe? Do you make them safe by 2030? No. When do you make them safe? Now. And how do you do that? You engage your communities. The police, together with those members of this community plus police organ or forum or institution, come together to address the generators of crime, to address alcohol that's being sold at ungodly hours, to address the issue of vigilantism, mob justice within our communities as a result of a slow reaction from police station A to police station Z in this context. Our responsibility as members of the community plus police forum is once again to ensure that you instill a sense of I am safe, my daughter is safe, my father is safe, my mother is safe whilst I'm in Pretoria and my mother is in Western Area or Bekkersdal or Mohlaking. When we begin to engage communities on a day-to-day basis, monthly basis, when we turn that police station into a safety and security development center, the people take on by themselves the element of safety and security. They become ambassadors of safety and security. But the moment those police stations are centers of pain, people walk away from the relationship that they're supposed to have with the communities. Hence, you saw, amongst others, community policing fora being silent at all the provinces where you have observed, where you have the provincial community police boards. You haven't seen the provincial chairpersons condemning the violence, condemning the murder where there was murder, condemning the looting. It is the responsibility of those who are in leadership to make uncomfortable decisions that bring about stability within our communities. I have spent a sizable amount of time in Jagfontein, in Western area, in the farming areas. Bronco sprayed, I've spent a sizable amount of time with the people. Melder's draft, we all know that a few years ago, there were incidents of white people being killed in that particular area. I'm going to use white people advisedly so. Excuse me. You spend time with those communities. When you don't understand those communities, the fear of the people, seeing a van once in a while because there are no resources at the Melder's Draft police station where I've spent more than 6 months every night. It becomes key and critical that you understand that against this backdrop, against the challenges that we have, you will find yourself in a situation where when there is an emergency situation or this unrest or this explosive situation, you find that your community policing structure, your community police partnerships collapse. They collapsed in this instance, and other people outside of this constitutional structure took it upon themselves. Yes, we were all overwhelmed. We never expected this to happen, but myself being a strategist by training and profession and doing analysis, profiling situation, when you don't address the generators of this situation, unemployment, the hunger that we see in our communities, and ensuring that amongst others, those who are trying to eke a living in small businesses are being provided assistance by our government and people like yourselves on this panel. The expertise that we have, we need to go out into the communities, invest in them, show them how to run these businesses. Most importantly, go out to these spaza shops like I do, and the guys who were escorting me whilst I was the chairperson of the provincial board, going out there to buy just a can of Coca-Cola or Sprite at spaza shop A, or when I'm in Bronco Spray, going to that farm stall to go a bag of oranges, empowering them instead of showing them that I am the be all and end all of advice and driving around in the community and showing up on social media and on TV. Doing what Rama is saying, acting on what we're supposed to do to ensure that the safety and security, and by providing an economic platform that helps people to can be safe, to feel safe, so as to participate. Let me tell you what has broken my heart over a number of years. The patrollers that you see out there, going out night after night, using their cell phones to send please call me to police vans, sending out please call me to some of yourselves on this discussion, some of ourselves, so that you can phone the police van to back them up in situation A or B, and them not getting even a stipend. Well, as time went on, they got stipends. Some of them got stipends, and some did not get those stipends. Long story short, when you empower, when you create a back a body campaign sort of initiatives that helps people to stand on their own, defend their communities, give them the support that they would give to the farmers in Randfontein, in Koksort, in all of those areas, so that they can stand with the farmers and ensure that stock theft is minimized. When they see suspicious characters, these individuals who form part and parcel of your community and police coming together into an organization that combats, that prevents and combats crime, and actually instill a sense of safety and security, so that other citizens can then, when they go to the Sentin police station, can then bring their part to ensure that the mindset of a safe and a secure South Africa takes effect now, not in 2030 as prescribed in the National Development Plan. We have a responsibility to join forces to ensure that we go to the National Commission and say, here's a vehicle that I have organized to help at the Sentin police station, to help at Beckersdal police station, Leboa Khomo police station, so that you have force multipliers from a resources point of view, congregation and galvanization of the resources so that police can react on time and police can have resources. I can tell you now without any fear of favor.
Andy, I'm going to have to interrupt you so I can allow Terence to have, we've only got an hour for the call. So if it would be okay with you, can I hand over to Terence?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Angie. Can you hear me? Okay. Those are two very, very hard acts to follow, and as I go through my my presentation, I will be referring to some of the things that we've just heard. The question of FCA, of guns, and of vigilantism. This is probably the toughest topic that I've had to talk about over the past couple of weeks. And I've been on the trail of the FCA amendment. I've been quite outspoken about it. This is a very tough one, in part because vigilantism has everything and nothing to do with this amendment at once. We often describe vigilantism, and I'm just going to riff on this word for a couple of minutes, as taking the law into our own hands. I wanted to just leave you that thought because I'll be coming back to it. And I'd like to say that that a healthy society is generally not in a position to have to deal with vigilantism. The origin of the word vigilante is from Spanish. It means watchful. It seems to have originated in the 19th century, and it described the night watchman that used to exist before proper police forces were established. These people would patrol the streets at night, usually with a lantern. They formed a very early type of constabulary. Now, the idea vigilante comes from the word vigilant, keeping an eye on. This is a concept that exists in Anglo-Saxon law, the idea of posse comitatus, where civilians can be roped in to ensure that that peace and order are maintained. In fact, the United States actually has legislation on this. And anyone who's watched Western movies, you know, the idea of the posse going out, that was actually quite common in the 19th century with towns with very little revenue base, often having to solve their own problems, would literally deputize citizens to accompany the sheriff, who had a sort of elective office. But when we use the word vigilante, it's come to be associated with something darker, something that is inherently violent, that pits one group against another. I'll give you a few examples of this. During the time of the Jack the Ripper scare or murders in London, there was something called the Vigilance Committee that sprang up in the East End. These were people who were obviously frightened of the murders that were taking place, and organized essentially armed mobs to rove around the affected neighborhoods, hoping that they would catch this guy. We've seen examples in Northern Ireland, for instance, where both Catholic and Protestant paramilitary groups have taken to not only fighting for, let's say, political causes, but also going after things like heroin addicts. The idea was that you didn't find many heroin addicts in Belfast because the IRA used to shoot their kneecaps off. And in Nigeria, the various gangs such as the Bakassi boys, the Bisu boys, who function with a certain level of official sanction, but these things often spill over into political intimidation, into extortion. What all of these have in common is that you are dealing with situations where there is some sort of illegitimacy of the state and some sort of broken law. And what this type of vigilantism does, and it's a vigilantism that goes beyond a kind of citizen activism, which I would say is the original vigilante concept, to one that goes into a kind of mob justice or street justice, judge, jury, and executioner. It seeks to impose order, but without the critical sanction of law, and no law-governed society can sustain that. Now, I don't want to get. I think Rama's done an excellent job of explaining the situation in KZN. I come from KZN myself, and often remark that modern South Africa was formed there through things like Blood River, the Anglo-Zulu War, the Bambata Rebellion, and perhaps this is another contribution KwaZulu-Natal can make in terms of driving the country forward. If we can use this as a productive platform to talk and to find solutions, and not simply to riff on what is wrong. I think we often forget that there are many people who are very invested in our problems, as opposed to finding solutions for them. There's enormous moral octane that comes with being outraged. In a situation of broken law, of debased policing and insecurity, people nevertheless cling to what is a basic, fundamental, natural right, and that is the right to life. And they will seek anything that can guarantee them that. And I believe that part of the natural right to life and the right to protection is the right to have the means to do so. This then informs my approach to civilian firearm ownership. We recognize the unique nature of a firearm as a means of force, but we accept that there are certain instances in which there is a natural right to protect oneself, and that this gives one the right to do that. We know that in the wrong hands, these are dangerous implements. So we have reasonable protections. A gun is a neutral thing, but its location in society and its use in society depends on the goals to which it has been put. And I would like to put the following to you: the situation that a functioning constitutional democracy needs to strive for is one in which the state provides the first and a very effective line of defense, where you can go about your daily business in the reasonable assurance that that chaos is held at bay. Civilian arms and the ability of civilians to protect themselves, and I would say the natural right to do so, is something that must be available and will, in a healthy society, be applied sparingly, because those threats will come through in very small numbers. Unfortunately, we are not at that position at the moment. If I have enormous sympathy for police officers in South Africa, and some of that comes from simply knowing a good number of them. Very hardworking people, often very stressed, who surrender an enormous amount of their personal lives to a career that is dangerous and often does not give satisfaction or social appreciation. But if I had to pick the defining image of what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, it would be of the police officers walking around the square in front of the mall in Soweto, occasionally stopping to discharge rounds from their shotguns. It wasn't so much that they were impotent, as they almost seemed irrelevant. The scale of the problem had simply overwhelmed them. This is not just a security problem. This, gets to an entire crisis of governance and a crisis of unmet expectations that have lain belief. So that lie beneath that. Sorry. So where do we go from here? well, I'd like to just go back to the concept about taking the law into your own hands. I think that the somehow mistakes the position that a constitutional democracy should look at. It is the responsibility of each of us to contribute to the maintenance of law, and at times I think that does require proactive measures. But as I say, these need to be regulated. These need to be sparingly applied, and we need to strive for a situation in which the needs to do that becomes very, very exceptional. President Ramaphosa in his letter earlier this week said that the country will not tolerate vigilantism, and if anything, I think that statement sums up the problem. That while the government may not want to tolerate it, it's simply not in a position really to either to stop it or to remove the conditions that make it inevitable. And I think both Ndili and Rama, both Andy and Rama were talking about changing those dynamics, and that is where I think this needs to go. So I think that there are things that can be done. First of all, the state of policing needs to be radically improved. If there's one thing that I bring out of the security aspects of the recent unrest, it's the massive intelligence failure. I mean, I think someone compared this to 9/11 in the United States. It's absolutely, it just boggles the mind that no one seemed to see this coming until it was on top of us. And I think that's also where cooperation with communities is very important. Communities are a source of intelligence. Once you have the intelligence sorted out, actually controlling crime becomes a great deal easier. I don't think that we have been able to establish those sort of relationships. There are parts where it's happened, but not as a whole. We also have to recognize the legitimate predicament that millions and millions of South Africans are in. That the state is not coming to is not in a position to come to its aid, and will not be for a long time. Now, I want to say here, I don't have any easy answers for this. I don't. There is something that sits very uncomfortably with me in the idea that you want to sort of integrate vigilantes into your law enforcement organization, particularly when they come with their own set of interests. A colleague of mine has close connections to Venezuela, and he says that the government under then President Chavez effectively banned civilian firearms ownership, but flooded particularly the poorer neighborhoods with guns through politically aligned organizations. Venezuela, actually, I understand, has a worse murder problem than we do, and this essentially has started to function as a tool of repression. I think that as this deals with firearms as a whole, to remove the means for self-defense in an environment in which we are living is to encourage the very conditions, the fear, the paranoia, the sense of helplessness, the idea that that there is no ability to fight, so you have to flee. That belies much that underpins much of the insecurity and the pathologies that we have in South Africa at the moment. And I think paradoxically, this is probably going to spur on more of that aggressive vigilantism. Forcing people to surrender legal firearms is going to persuade desperate people to look elsewhere for illegal firearms. And I don't think that in the condition that we live in, that is going to be a particularly difficult thing to do. So, in conclusion, one thing that I don't think I've managed to do particularly well in this is to set forth a seamless narrative, and this is because this is complicated. There are issues that bounce around in my own mind that conflict with one another. It's the kind of thing that we need to discuss with rationality, with calmness. And in all things, I think this is going to involve finding some sort of equitable balance that recognizes risks, responsibilities, and rights. Each one of those in equal measure. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for the moment.
Terence, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan, the closing of the panel. If you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat boxes, and we'll answer them from there. Thanks, Jonathan.
He's muted.
Sorry, we're unmuted. Right. Thanks, Angie. I think for me, the police as an institution are expected to underpin the rule of law, giving practical effect to the vision and the rights inherent in our constitution. And they have a responsibility that is far broader and deeper than the various and separate elements of law enforcement and service to the public. So my view is that instead of presenting the loss of life in KwaZulu-Natal as a racial or vigilante issue, the police should be critically evaluating, and the government as well, its complete failure to look after the public. In essence, the SAPS need to step up and own the damage and the trauma experienced by South Africans in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. And I think that we need to ask SAPS if what has happened in our country on their watch will become a turning point towards effective policing, or simply a political talking point in which they try to deflect the blame. Because at the moment, it sounds to me like they're busy looking for somebody else to blame for what has happened on their watch. The duty of the SAPS to the public and the obligation of the government to hold SAPS accountable for its performance, I think, has been very well underscored for all of us in this month. Issues like water, power, fuel supplies, food, medicines, healthcare, and the very economy of the country all depend on law and order. The unchecked riots that we've experienced have cost our country more than 300 lives, 50 billion rand, and 75,000 jobs in a time when the economy was already reeling from the effects of COVID. And the bulk of this could have been stopped had we been protected by a properly prepared and equipped police force. In reality, the uniformed rank and file on the front lines have been let down by a top-heavy command structure. And it might surprise you to know that the command structure of the police includes around 200 generals and more than 600 brigadiers, collectively earning about 1 billion rand annually. Statistics furnished by the ISS, or the Institute of Security Studies, today in the media reflect an alarming downward spiral in the effectiveness of the SAPS over the last 8 years. Between 2012 and 2020, roadblocks have gone down by 40%. The number of people searched has decreased by about 90%. Air support operations by more than 80% decrease. Firearms recovered or confiscated have declined by 50%. And the detection rate for murder has fallen by almost 40%. While the number of arrests has gone up by 46%, there are not more cases in court. Between 2011 and 2012 and 1920, for instance, the number of cases in which a verdict has been reached by the courts has dropped by 27%. And I would suggest to you that this is well connected to the inability of the SAPS to present reliable forensic evidence, which has been well aired in the media. Another example, even with the assistance of the military on the Cape Flats, SAPS has been unable to deal with gangsterism that plagues the law-abiding families that live in that community. More than 1,000 innocent people, including children in the Cape, have succumbed to violence from the gangsterism helped along by thousands of guns sold to gangsters by corrupt police officers. That case is still not finalized yet. Meanwhile, it is reported in this week in Gauteng that 50% of the flying squad vehicles are out of service, and 1 out of 7 police helicopters is in the air. So quite simply, ladies and gentlemen, the SAPS is in tatters. And in my view, it has become a political tool rather than an effective public service, as promised in Chapter 12 of our National Democratic Plan, or NDP. National Development Plan. The public, in essence, feel unsafe, and they are unsafe. and it is clear that in the current SAPS structures, political loyalty is valued over core competence to do the job. To illustrate this statement, consider that SAPS, at the height of the violence that tore across our country, was led by a man who has been found to be politically deeply compromised. SAPS National Commissioner Kehla Sitole, on June the 30th, failed in his appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal to overturn a scathing judgment handed down in January this year by Judge Norman Davis in the Gauteng High Court, which found that Commissioner Sitole and his two deputies had placed the interests of the governing party ahead of those of the country. And into this melee of insecurity and downright ineptitude to protect the public, the police then grandly launched the Firearms Control Amendment Bill. And I submit to you, it is an irrational piece of legislation. It has been incubated in secret with critical research concealed from the very stakeholders who have volunteered to bring valuable skills to the table. An act that, were to become law, would strip the community of the ability to defend themselves against the ever-present reality of violent crime. Interestingly and intriguingly, the new bill grandly proclaims as its reason for existence the lofty aim, and listen to this carefully, of ensuring restricted access to firearms by civilians to ensure public order and to secure and protect civilians. It is incontestable that in the July riots, citizens from all communities standing together actually saved the day for this government, stalling subversive plans to intensify the looting and expand it across South Africa. If such a bill were to have passed before the riots of July 2021 and citizens were de facto disarmed, the impact of the unchecked riots would probably have imploded our economy and most certainly collapsed the rule of law. Even before the riots, SAPS had publicly acknowledged that they can't protect the community. Mr. Chele, in September 2018 to our parliament, most famously was on record telling our leaders that South Africans are living in a war zone, yet the country is not at war. Ladies and gentlemen, that was 3 years ago. And the last years have seen only an increase in the daily murder rates of South Africa, while contact crimes like rape and serious assault have also increased, as have violent robberies, home invasions, arson, petrol bombing of trucks, and CIT robberies. I submit to you in closing today, and thank you for listening to what I had to say, that it is long past time for the government to abandon an irrational aim of disarming law-abiding citizens and focus instead on the support that can be extended to our communities and the police by lawfully armed and responsible citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to hand over to Tim to do the closing.
Jonathan, thank you very, very much indeed for that thorough, analytical and measured delivery and intervention. You raised statistics I had not read, so thank you for alerting one to those, to the ISS research, to place the context of the decay of SAPS, to place it in context historical and in terms of its leadership. And I would submit that everybody on the call today has a vested interest and a keen interest in the rehabilitation and the reconfiguration of SAPS so it becomes fit for purpose. Difficult to think of a SAPS that has been fit for purpose for some time now. Difficult to think of a SAPS that has had the sort of leadership that is both perhaps even inspirational, but also attracts support from communities and political leadership alike. It's obviously a very contested terrain, and you correctly point out the most recent legal case with regard to the commissioner. But this goes back a long way, Jonathan, as you will recall, with successive commissioners. The current minister is not without controversy in this space. IPID has been a controversial space. The entire security cluster has been a deeply contested space, and one that has been manipulated for many, many years now for political ends. And it didn't start with Jacob Zuma, as we know, nor did it start with an ANC government in 1994. The net effect of this, I think, is a point that Rama made right up front, which I think is the one that struck me throughout, is a sense of vulnerability that we're experiencing in South Africa. Like, I cannot recall. There have been periods in our history where one has felt vulnerable, even coming from a privileged middle-class background like my own, but feeling vulnerable as a South African citizen. And I think, if nothing else, the whatever terminology one wishes to use for the events in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, and by the way, that terminology has regrettably been politicized immediately, and for very deliberate political purposes too. So I think this platform has made a contribution to a more analytical viewpoint with respect to what was going on, what has gone on. My fear is that something like a commission of inquiry gets set up, it in fact becomes a witch hunt and is used for political purposes as well. So this element of vulnerability, I think, is consistent. I think what's also been consistent from our discussions is the need for us to engage each other, to be self-reflective. But I think to use whatever voices we have to begin to attempt to re-engineer a SAPS, community policing fora, and civilian engagement at the right level. And to be vigilant about that rather than being vigilantes about it. And I think it's an important distinction there. Everyone on this call is vigilant and hopefully anonymous of vigilantes. I fear if you like, the tainting of what has come out of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng as being a kind of monochromatic position as well, in which certain communities or elements in communities are being dismissed, painted as being, aggressive and racist and using ethnic mobilization for particular ends. And that is a very toxic mix that Rama has highlighted. So I think there's a lot of engagement. The media too, I think, played a brilliant role in exposing what was going on. They were brave, but I think it now has a responsibility. Was it you, Terence, that was speaking about responsibility, and or Jonathan, about roles and responsibilities? Frankly, we all have a responsibility to recalibrate this debate and this narrative. So that would be the final word from myself. Just for those who have an interest in these matters, the deadline for submission, public submission to the FCA, the Firearms Control Act, or the bill, the amendment bill, is Monday the 2nd. Irrespective of which position you adopt in this matter, if you wish to make a submission, please, it's on our Facebook page. I know that, Jonathan, you've got a lot of material there as well. So if you'd like to make a submission on the FCA, please, by, I think, close it, it's at 4:30 on Monday. I think that's really about it. So I'm not very good at seeing questions, seeing them on a screen. So I think we are running now over time, Ange. Do we wrap up now?
We don't have any direct questions, but
okay.
I will be making.
Are we going to then? You're going to make the video available, put it onto the YouTube and things like. So you'll send the link around once you've done your magic with this, and send it. And it will be on our Facebook page as well. And then we'll send out something to the press as well. So just absolutely enormous thanks to everybody for their participation, giving up their time, their thoughtfulness, their contribution to this debate. And you instill pride and confidence in us. So thank you for that. Thanks for everybody joining. Be safe, and let's see how we can change this from a disaster to democratic development. Thank you, everybody.